Set your robots at that too. Like 5 minutes after you leave. Because if the ribbon's running, you're at home having to step over.
That's a good way to think of that. All right, we're hopping back into interview preparation. So last time we talked about a lot of what the resume should look like, what the process is kind of at a high level. We're going to start diving into what can you be doing well in advance of and right up until the point of an interview. So kind of put yourself on a timeline. This could either be a timeline for an internship, or this could be a timeline for after you graduate, what does it look like? So we talked about a long list of what you should be focusing on, but when should you be focusing on those aspects? So we'll start what you should be working on 1 year or more ahead of that. So what should you be doing in preparation for a job search? Because that's probably a year, little more than a year, little more than 2 years out for most of you. So you should be thinking about what kinds of projects you can build outside of school or work. What kind of passion projects are useful to you? So either we talked yesterday about going and finding open source repositories and open source code that you can contribute to, then you could add yourself as a collaborator to that. You can use that to network. So that's something that I would recommend doing over a summer or over a break if you have some time, just figuring out what are some projects that I could contribute to. You can also start learning more languages, and there's something to be said about trying to learn languages from scratch. The thing that's been most effective for me was actually learning about language design theory. What is it that all languages need to do? What is it that all languages, or what are the different ways that languages can do each of those things when we're looking for efficiency, when we're looking for scalability, when we're looking for platform independence, or other reasons that you might select one language over another. Languages that I would target through the use of this, you can look at language paradigms. So we've been mostly in an object-oriented paradigm since we started the education, but if you're taking C in Unix, you're probably looking at a procedural paradigm in C. There are plenty of languages out there that adhere to the functional paradigm. So it's worth at least going and looking at what's the difference between using an object-oriented language like Java and using a functional language like Haskell or F# or OCaml or Lisp. A bunch of languages that are very useful for some aspects and are very good at list manipulation. If you don't know what a fold is, that's a programmatic concept that comes out of functional language theory. And it looks very different. Heck, let's go take a look at what a program looks like in a functional paradigm, because why not? That was simple. First OCaml program. So here's an example of a functional program. If this looks like gibberish to you, that is probably because it would be great to go look at different language paradigms. So there's a lot more to programming than just object-oriented. A lot of what's done out in the world is object-oriented, but you will open doors if you have a wider appreciation of what's out there. I have a few books on programming language theory that I can loan out or recommend if you'd like to just do some summer research and work on the different kinds of languages that are out there. This still does exactly the same things that any other language can do, but it does them differently underneath the hood for different reasons. Why is that? What can you explore and learn? You should be building your professional network. Whenever there's an opportunity for you to get to know someone in the industry or to attend an event that might lead to a job, it is very worth it. Events, even if that does not lead to something, it will get you casual networking. It will get you some casual acquaintances. Maybe you have some Discord server that you'd like to be a part of that becomes a community that leads to some opportunities, that leads to some more networking. It is much more valuable, and this will come from 5 seconds out of a day-long event that leads to what is valuable. So even if you don't experience much success in your first event, or it takes a little while to get going, it doesn't take very long. It takes meeting the right person, learning the right thing to shoot you along a trajectory that becomes your career. If you don't have those opportunities, or if you stay home, play video games, you don't get those same types of connections and networking events that you would get if you were out and about. That's not to say don't do those things, just be aware of a balance. Just like you have a work-life balance or a school-life balance here, maybe some more so than others, but make sure that in your free time, you're prioritizing a work-life balance as well, just because you're not in the middle of that career yet. And if you'd like that career to be as fruitious and useful as possible, you want to open as many doors as you can so you can pick between doors so you can keep being happy or be happy again if you're not currently. So any events and conferences, if there's any way you can do this, your phone is pretty good at this. Just do a bunch of Google searches for this, and then it will start showing up in whatever news feeds and advertisements you get as soon as you can actually make use of this. So what kinds of conferences and events are going on? As soon as an AI picks up that you're interested in computer science conferences and local events, it will start feeding that information to you. You should all have a LinkedIn and a GitHub account. We will be, if you take software engineering from me, we will be filling that GitHub with a lot of stuff in 350, but it's worth, if you're going to be doing anything between now and then, just making sure that you have some documentation with some history associated with it. Even if your LinkedIn just says undergraduate student at Eastern Washington University, that's great. That's a great start. You can throw your GitHub account on your LinkedIn. You can start to populate some of that information so that it doesn't look like it was just created the minute you needed it for networking. There's a little bit of a history. Be looking for internships. Even if you're not planning to get one, start going through that searching process. Where are you looking? Where should you be looking? Where can you find this information? One site that I have found yet, so this happens to every fun tool that you'll ever use. It gets bought out by someone and then they turn it to garbage. So being up to date on the most recent tools that haven't been fully monetized yet, the basic process is free, open source, wonderful service, gets a bunch of users, gets awareness, spreads the word, it's useful. Once they have the users, now it's sellable. Now they'll monetize and get out. And that's when that just becomes one of the other bunch of things you should not use. The current thing that I'm aware of that people should probably be aware of is called Iron Cafe. This uses ChatGPT to scrape a bunch of web job sites as well as industry websites. Free tool, you can, it basically is like a Google Jobs or internships search that is more open and pulling from more places and with better abilities to, as far as I can tell, actually look for exactly what you're looking for. So if you want to look for things like titles and keywords, you can add queries to that. You can check for a required level of experience based on whatever you want. necessary security clearance. Let's see, there was also the entire US, so you can look for remote and hybrid in all environments, or you can search by location and say, I don't want to work remotely. I want to work hybrid or on-site. Levels of as much of it as you can find, and then search for, you know, anything in Spokane. Around Spokane, exactly in Spokane, and remote in the US. And then apply, and then let's see. Any type of requirements. Let's see if I can grab. There was, one of these was. Yeah, here we go. You select things like software development, IT, data and analytics. Probably not engineering, probably not design, at least for the moment, but obviously you may be able to have more of these, but just looking at the jobs, they then sort them by how recently they were posted, and it's very useful. Requires there's no real perk or huge perk to creating an account, aside from being able to set your preferences and get notifications. So this feels to me like a premium service that could charge something eventually. But for the moment, they're in the user gathering phase. This will eventually be monetized. For the moment, make use of it until it becomes monetized, and then ditch it like I've ditched everything else. It's probably not the one stop, everything is here, but I find, at least since I became aware of it and I've tried to use it to help people, that it's not bad. So be looking for internships, thinking about, if I were in the process of this, how would I find them? This may also help you figure out what is available out in, what opportunities are out there. What should you be doing to make the eventual search you go down more efficient? And then when you look at the classes you're going to be taking, take those classes with large projects. Something that you can actually put in your GitHub that will be something that you could show to prospective employers. You never know what's going to be useful and when. So the more you have to show for what you've done, the better off you will look. So that's kind of the passive ongoing stuff you should be thinking about. When I have time, spend some time on those things. Now you're actually in the hunt of, I am in internship finding mode, or I am in job finding mode. So what does the search look like leading up to the interview? When you're in the middle of that, think about, what are the weaknesses in the projects that I have? What skills do I not have a project that shows that I have that skill? Even if you're working on a class project, if you can do that in any language, maybe you decide that maybe this is the time for me to explore some adjacent language to a language that I know. Can I submit this in Python instead of Java? Can I submit this in C++? Can I really challenge myself and submit this in Haskell? Yeah, it doesn't mean you should, but if that means that you can eventually add that to a code portfolio in a way that shows I have this varied skill. Also, when given the opportunity, I challenge myself to learn new things. That's a great project to have on your GitHub that you can show an employer when they ask a question like, what is the time that you've done more than what was asked of you, or something like that. Be working on your resume, but come up with a final draft resume or a baseline resume. I've said that you should be customizing that resume for each job you apply for, but have some kind of template or repository of things you'd like to put on your resume, and then have a draft of, here's the generic one, to swap things out for particular employers as needed. But I would get that baseline resume ready so you're not cramming that once you need to send it somewhere. Also make a list of preferred companies. You can start thinking about, if you really want to work in the area, then you should have F5 on a short list. You should have Intelitech on a short list. You should have SEL on a short list. Places that we know, Avista on a short list. Places that hire a lot of our graduates, but also have a wide variety of positions that are available or consistently become available. Make a list of those places that do the things that you would like to do. And if you have a standing list of those, you can always go and look through their sites' job postings. It could be that AI-driven sites don't scrape every single position. If everyone is using the same sources to find those jobs, if you go and find the job that's only for some reason listed on their site, you're more likely to get it. There are fewer applicants. People aren't finding it on the big search tools. Academically, review some of the stuff we taught in the class, like big O notation, being able to think about that and pull that out immediately. What's the runtime of this solution that you just implemented? You should be able to talk about that, just like you took an exam on it 2 days ago. Implement data structures and algorithms, especially those that you have not implemented, or go back and review the ones you have implemented. Could you implement the same thing that you implemented in one language in another language as a way of learning that language? Then you could show, I do have projects that are in these different languages, but you base them on projects you already have to make that process as easy as possible. You should be aware of LeetCode, Caddis, Project Euler, other places where you can go practice algorithms. If you make an account on these, make sure that you track that, and maybe somewhere, it can be on your resume, it can be somewhere to talk about the total completion that you have done on those sites. I'm going to show them to you in case you have not seen them before. Not necessarily one of these. Just going to LeetCode, you can see that you can create an account. You can where do we want to go? We don't necessarily want all of this. We just want you can create your own study plan on LeetCode at least. You make an account and you can start gathering, basically, you can start doing any of these problems. They come with an associated difficulty. If you subscribe to it and pay for it, you can see how frequently these kinds of problems show up in interviews. There are already some custom plans like the top interview 150 must-do list for interview prep. What you need to be aware of, just even saying this can kind of be a certification for you to say, I've done all the LeetCode top interview 150 or something like that. I don't know if that really matters in an interview setting, just showing that you're actively trying to improve your knowledge of data structures and algorithms. So LeetCode is great for particular implementations, but my favorite site to use is Caddis. It's probably the more academic version. So Caddis is phenomenal because it is a repository of all of the programming problems on official events. So ACM, ICPC, the programming competitions that people actually go to and compete in. That said, a lot of these are actually quite easy. If I sort them from easy to difficult, you can see that some of the easy ones are problems that you would expect to be the first lab in 210. So it does not start with the most complicated something ever. The reason that these are in this database is it basically becomes a can you submit to a test for can you submit to the contest servers. So you can get something as easy as just hello world. But the fun parts of this come when you go take a look at any of these problems. And let's even say, what is one of these that I am familiar with as an easy problem? Echo, echo, echo. I love this one. So basically, there's an in browser. You can take a look at that. You see that everything is basically an input description and an output description. Your goal is to assume the input and produce the output. So this is just taking the input and repeating it 3 times. Having a solution to this is great, but if you look at there are some requirements as well. You get a CPU time limit as well as a memory limit for your solutions. This allows Caddis to actually test, can you implement something in the associated time and space complexity that is required? And the more difficult problems here will require an optimal or near optimal solution, especially in slower languages. This might give you a reason to learn a new language, to be able to get something in under the threshold with a worse algorithm than might otherwise be acceptable. The other fun thing to do is to look at the statistics of a problem, because there is this concept called code golfing. I don't know if people are aware of the concept of code golfing, but it's a competitive practice where the goal is to implement the algorithm in as few characters as possible. So these programs are highly unreadable. Why would you have a new line if you don't need to? They should just be, if you need to separate anything, semicolon, no space. Just start the next line. So it's everything's on one line, everything's as minimized as possible. Variable names should be a single letter. How can you get everything as short as possible? You can see that to solve echo, 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 the shortest problem, the shortest solution, of course, it's in Bash because it should be. Those of you in C and Unix hopefully know what Bash is at this point. But the shortest solution is 5 characters in Bash. No. They are hidden behind, I'm sure people have published, if it's something like this. Then there's some way to know about that, but no, there is no way to see the solutions to these problems, which also forces your hand. And also from an interview setting, the interviewers will know, unless you are scouring the internet for solutions to a particular Caddis problem that you've implemented and solved this yourself. You didn't have a solution to go look at or validate, you just have access to it. Or sorry, you just solved it yourself. So you must have the knowledge to solve it yourself, which is great. Whenever I host coding competitions, so I hosted one for Skills USA this quarter, for instance, I pulled problems directly off Caddis. The code implementation problem on your first exam was pulled off LeetCode. So as much as I like to invent things myself, I also recognize the value of a lot of the tools that are out there. So I like to pull from a lot of these sources when I'm making my own exams, because they're exactly what people are looking for. It is real practice, not just something that I invented. So lots of cool tools. I didn't show you Project Euler, but Project Euler is a very math-driven site as well. A lot of the problems that they give are solving things like, what is some arbitrarily largest prime? And you'll write a program to get that answer, but you're not going to use anything in browser, and it doesn't actually compile and run your code. It asks for some particular value. So you would run the application yourself, get that value, report that value, then it says you solved the problem. So the submission to get to Project Euler is not a program, it's a value. Last thing, mock interview groups with friends. I'm in the process of trying to get something on a schedule eventually. It won't be next year, but maybe it can be the year after, where there is either an elective or maybe as part of a degree rework, I try to find a place for interviewing and job prep as a course. Until that is a thing that I can provide, my schedule is full. You'll have to figure out how to do what I would try to simulate in that class yourself, which is to find some people to hold a mock interview with. If you want some ideas for that, feel free to come talk to me.
With most career centers, I'm not sure about you, they'll do mock interviews, so I'll do like bring standard type interview questions to the career center.
Yeah, that is very true as well. Yeah, look out to the career center.
Like how to hold an interview, and even if they don't really know what an interview looks like in their field, so I'll give them like questions that are common to the field that are very good at.
Yeah, that's very true as well. We get into the 1 to 3 months before. So at this point, you probably are invited to an interview. Or you're scheduling an interview, or you're deep in the process of, I have hundreds of applications out. It's a matter of time before someone wants to talk to me. So here is when you're going to be practicing interview questions. I'll give you a good list of the kinds of questions you may want to prepare yourself for, but start practicing those questions. Come up with some default answers to some of those questions, or start thinking about what is the realm that I could use to pull an answer from, so that you're not coming up with something off the top of your head in the interview. I do that too frequently. I usually can come up with pretty good examples, but it's very much worth, especially your first pass through doing this, have some prep for those questions. That said, don't try to force the answers to be some of the answers that you have practiced. It's pretty obvious when you're yanking the direction of the interview towards something that you've practiced and not just answering the questions that they're giving you. Start documenting mistakes you make when you're practicing either a mock interview or interview types of questions. What are the common mistakes that you make? Again, it's not to judge yourself, it's just to be aware of what should you focus on and what should you practice, so that in the real situation, you will be less likely to make a grave mistake. I can tell people the worst mistakes that I've made in interviews. I bungled a question when I said that my research was very multidisciplinary by nature. In the middle of an interview, one person said, "Oh, one of the people who's here is in exactly this field. How would you collaborate with them, or what would you do with that?" And for the life of me, I could not come up with, off the top of my head, a really good answer to that. So I came up with kind of a half answer that was a vague answer, and I knew it was a vague answer. After the interview was over, I followed up with the chair of that and said, "Sorry, I didn't really get a chance to think about or get my ideas down. Here are my ideas on this, now that I've had a chance to sit down and think about it." Never heard back from them, but I felt like I handled that as well as I could have. The goal is to avoid that type of mistake coming up as frequently as possible in an interview. They will happen. You can't beat yourself up when it does happen, and you can recover from it to the best of your ability by reaching back out and clarifying. Or people are not necessarily great in the moment, every moment, and people will recognize that. The question is, what do you do about it? Do you follow up, or do you just say, oh well, I'll try again next time? So once you identify mistakes like that, group them into categories and start to think about, right, for each of those categories, what can you do about that? Think about why that happens. Dive into the depths of the internet. I'm sure you're not the only one who struggles with that. So you can start to research how to get around some of those mistakes so that you'll get in the actual important interview setting. Getting into that last month. If you have a resume on hand, maybe you made it a year ago as a draft, review it, add last minute details to it. What have you done since the last time you edited this? Start really applying. You probably should be just doing this passively over a longer period of time. This comes from some material that was a little while ago, so it's probably more intense than this now. The beginning applying to jobs is probably more like 2 or 3 months before, and not 4 weeks before in today's environment. But when you do start applying to jobs, make sure you're applying to a wide range of them. You should be applying to jobs you feel underqualified for, jobs that you feel is a perfect fit. That's exactly what I want to do. It would challenge me and use everything that I know, but I don't feel underqualified for it. And then some fallbacks that you feel overqualified for as well. This could be just the job that you have temporarily while you look for something that's a perfect fit, or maybe a position that you feel slightly underqualified for, but would really push you to learn more, so that 10 years from now, you're in the best situation you could be in. If you get jobs that you're underqualified for, or you feel that you're underqualified for, go take them, do the best that you can with them, and you will learn from that process. It is likely that you will become a star on that team. This is kind of what happened to my wife in her most recent job search. The job she took, as she was applying and thinking about it, it was scary. It utilized international tax that she had no background in. But she got the position. She works there and is now very happy and learning at a rate that she would not be learning at any other position, I don't think. And it's also going to open doors in 10 years. If she ever needs to change positions again, she'll have a lot more experience and a lot wider variety of situations. She'll be more hireable, have more experience. We'll get a better salary and or have more options to be able to say this job is a perfect fit for me. The more doors you can open, the more options you have. That's great. Also notice that you're not necessarily going to be the same person with the same preferences today and when you're doing that. So opening doors now might be a door, even if it doesn't seem particularly relevant to you today, it might be a door that is relevant to you in a year or 2 years or 20 years. Doors that are open can be chosen to be walked through. Doors that are closed, you need a tool to break it down. Think about common interview questions. We're going to go into these after this section. Continue to practice writing code on paper. Another one of the reasons I hold exams on paper in person is to get you experience with writing syntax. Again, it does not have to be perfect syntax, but you should at least make sure that the mistakes that you make are fewer and further between where possible, or are things that an IDE would easily catch.
A similar thing to do would be this notepad, if you're on Windows or some other like straight up very, very basic text.
Yeah, that's true as well.
That way you can also, once you're done, put it down, come back to it and then run it in that. And then be like, where did it go wrong?
Yeah. Notepad++ gives you syntax highlighting without any auto completion or without anything else. So
Notepad
I
is
like
just-
Yeah, Notepad gives you no highlighting of any kind. Yeah. So I like doing it in Notepad++ because you still at least can see there's a visual aspect to not waste your own time while you're writing code. But you will have to make sure that you implement it yourself, which is good. So now you have something lined up. When I say a week before, this is something that is scheduled, or you're going through a first round interview process, kind of a screening interview ahead of an actual technical interview. So you're likely to be doing some kind of first round interviewing. Make sure as you do this that you're researching very important, you're researching the company's mission, who you'd be working with, who would your coworkers be. In general, what tools does this company use? If you have an interview scheduled at that point, you could even reach out ahead of that to someone who might have information about that and say, hi, as part of this application process, and so that I can formulate the best questions that I can in the interview. First of all, make sure that you've done all the research that you can to figure out what they do and what they use. But as you go through that, you may want to reach out and just say, I'm curious what you missed that, what technology do you use? So that you're ready in the technical interview setting to ask them good technical questions that is about what they use. And we'll go into what kinds of questions to ask, how to think about those as well. So you should be tailoring your answers that you give in an interview setting to their work. So this should be work that you do to prepare to do this. You should be asking them not generic questions that you would ask everyone. You should be asking them the questions directly about their company, their processes, their technology, your fit with all of those. So in your preparations, make sure you're thinking about that. How are you going to present yourself, especially in those remote interviews or for remote interviews? That means any visible mess should not be there. I've seen this a lot, even in faculty interviews. They're just not in a clean environment. It turns you off immediately if you can't bother to clean up your environment, what is it going to be like when you need to have a clean environment? Don't use my desk as an example of that, though. Once you're hired, you can do whatever you want. Something that's really underappreciated is having the ability to look like you're making eye contact in a remote interview. This is why I prefer to do those on a laptop rather than a desktop, because with a desktop with an attached camera, if it's a very large screen where the camera is on that and where you're referring to things or where it looks like their faces are going to be very different from each other. So from their perspective, it's going to look like you're not making eye contact with them. The smaller screen you can be on, the better, because there is less vertical distance between where you need to be looking and where the camera is. Just think about small details like that. It can come across, it can be the difference between coming across like someone who is passive and someone who is engaged, just from where you are looking during the interview. You would,
It also might look like cheating if you're like
yes,
run around.
yeah, that too. But that said, set up the screen for more than that. Do not just have Zoom as the only thing that is open during that interview. You should have a notes app on that same screen. Even if you have a 2-monitor setup, set it up on the same screen so that you are not looking all over the place during your interview. It should look like with this laptop, the difference between looking directly at the camera, looking at the left side of my screen and looking at the right side of the screen involves no head movement. Even if you're seeing my eyes move between a couple of locations, who knows what's going on? That's not suspicious by itself, but it also allows you to have your questions right here. So you're not looking somewhere trying to find your questions, and then you can have your questions and your notes on the same screen, on the same application that is going on with everyone that is there. They should still be visible as part of that interview, as part of that process. You should be able to engage with them, but it should not be the only thing on your screen. Something I also notice in computer scientists, and I very much try to not do this myself, is use filler words. Silence, at least to me, is more natural than a filler word. A filler word comes across as unintelligent. That you don't know what you're doing or that you have to fill space with something. It is okay to be silent and think. If that is something that's not natural to you, get up and give a presentation, but also think about, while you're giving that presentation, utilizing silence to some benefit. And you'll see that even I'm doing it right now. Rather than filling that space, having a bit of silence there is not that awkward. Unless you're very different from me and you think that is the most awkward person I've ever met, which is probably true, but hopefully not just for that reason. It drives me nuts to hear this too frequently. To give you a sense of what this is like, for those of you who don't do this, I urge you to go watch Love is Blind. The reason is, half of the words that are spoken on that show are the word like. It drives me up the wall.
Never since you.
My wife watches it. So I keep up with it at a very passive, I don't care kind of level. But at the same time, listening to dialogue between these people is so grating.
It's in Los Angeles and more with people that have a vowel.
No, it's all over the place. They've been in, where have they been? They've been in. The season was in Seattle. They still drove me nuts. There's something about the people who go on that show and or people who need social media for or use social media for a living. I think that it is even more common to have filler words in conversations between people who do that. I don't know, it's just something I've noticed.
I will talk your own stuff.
I'm interested to have the conversation. So also make sure that you test your setup. You do not want to have last minute connection issues, realize your volume is off, realize that you're talking and you're muted. Just make sure that you test your setup. It's not the time for things to be going wrong. Last minute review of common data structures and algorithms. Solve a couple more leak code or caddis problems. Day before, one last viewing of answers to common questions. One thing to note though is if you do it so much, it'll feel like it's rehearsed, that it is not genuine. Try to come across, if you can, as excited. Vary the pitch of your voice a little bit. As you do that, it sounds like you're more interested in what you're saying. Now, I'm not doing that, but I'm using exactly the same vocal pattern. But it doesn't sound like I'm interested in what I'm saying.
You sound very upset.
I either sound upset or bored or monotone or like I don't care. But if you sound interested in what you're saying and vary the pitch of your voice, it makes a huge difference, even though you're not using any more, and there's no difference in the emphasis, the amount of vocal emphasis, the amount of oomph to my voice, I guess. I'm using exactly the same oomph as when I talk in monotone. It makes a huge difference. One last pass on who the company is, personnel, the mission. What do you want to highlight during the interview? Make a list of, make sure that we touch on these very important points. If we don't touch on them before the questions, I need to ask these as questions. If you do all this review before the actual interview, you will be asking good questions, and I will go over and make sure to mention that there is a huge difference between a candidate who knows what they're asking in terms of questions and a candidate who does not. It's obvious who's done the research. It's obvious who actually wants the position versus someone who this is just their 417th interview. Take a generic approach, expect a generic response or no response. Yeah, so exactly that. Prepare your list of written questions, finalize it. What do you do on the day of an in-person technical interview? Even if it's remote, but get good sleep and eat a healthy breakfast is incredibly important regardless of where the interview is. If it's in person, arrive on time. If you're planning when you should leave, assume for all of the worst case happening. What is the worst case for traffic? What is the worst case for weather? If this is the night before or when you should do something. What happens if you need to do some extra ironing of your clothes? What if you need to save room for all of that? You do not need to save room for, oh no, if I get in an accident and have to go to the hospital. Don't save room for that, but save room for what's very likely to happen. Be confident. Don't be cocky. There's a big difference between those two statements. But what is the difference? Confidence is you sound like you know what you're doing. You come across as, yes, I can do that. Don't sound like, oh, that'll be easy. I've done 10 harder things. Don't worry about that. The difference there is, why are you so cocky? What are you trying to make up for with how cocky you are? My experience is someone who is overly cocky is making up for something. When you're in the interview, make sure that you're talking through everything that you're doing, the why behind what you're doing, especially as you're solving coding problems. Practice not beating yourself up in the moment if you stumble or if you struggle. Minimize the time that it takes you to recover from that. The first time I gave public presentations in a research setting, I think I had a moment of probably 6 or 7 consecutive seconds of silence because I locked up and could not think. I don't really have that happen to me anymore. It still happens occasionally, but I have figured out how to recover in 2 to 3 seconds from that. In a way that the first time it happened, it was 6 or 7 seconds. And the difference between 2 or 3 seconds of silence and 6 or 7 seconds of silence is a very big difference. Especially from the person who's trying to think of 6 or 7 seconds feels like 15 when you're struggling to come up with something. Once the interview is over, make sure that you write a thank you email. It really sets apart, again, those who are just interviewing everywhere and those who really want the position. If you don't hear back within 1 business week, check back in with them. Again, that shows initiative, it shows that you're interested in the position. You don't just have 400 applications out and you can't remember where you've been or what you're doing. The fact that you reached back out after a week, that's good. I recommend if you are applying to hundreds of jobs, set up calendar notifications or notifications on your phone or a daily, here are all of the places that you interviewed with or applied to a week ago. Here's who you should check back in with. If you don't get an offer, most companies have some kind of rule about when you can reapply. Again, you don't know why you didn't get the job. You may have been the second most qualified person or the next person they would have called for an interview. Once you get in an interview setting, maybe you just shine so much they give you the position. So rather than finding new companies to apply to all the time, ask when you can reapply and add those to another daily notification list or notifications on your phone of it has now been 3 months since you applied here. Reapply. The more organized you are in this approach, the less work it's going to be. With the last few minutes, we're going to talk about common behavioral questions. And computer science interviews tend to be interview after interview after interview these days. There's not 1 or 2 interviews. There can be 5, 6 interviews to get to the final process of hiring. So one of these interviews may just be an entire behavioral interview. This is likely with a recruiter rather than with a technical lead. It's someone who can ask you questions and really talk to you about your work ethic, your behavior, what kinds of, who are you outside of your technical ability? How do you work with others? How do you handle it when things go wrong? So common questions you might hear. Describe a technical or group challenge you've overcome. How did you overcome that? This is something you might want to have prepared going into an interview. Try to tailor this as much as you can to the company that you're applying to. If it is a scalability software company, then a technical or group challenge could what was the most relevant or related experience you had to that was a technical challenge or a group challenge that you overcame. Technical or group mistake or failure, how did you handle it? Don't skimp on the value of the failure. Choose something that actually shows a real failure, especially something that was on your part. How you recovered from it and how you handled it is what they're looking for here. It's not the extent of the failure, it's what happens. How do you handle the worst case? If you can show that you have a positive approach to a worst case, they will feel at ease. Even if you sometimes get into a worst case, I would rather hire someone who gets into worst cases but can handle it than someone who does not ever get into a worst case, but if they did, would destroy the entire company. I don't trust that person. Even though they don't ever make mistakes, I still don't trust them. Another common question, describe a project you work on that you really enjoyed. Why did you enjoy it? This is a passion question that says, what excites you about what you do for a living? How can you show that what you did when you were excited about what you do? You should have an example of this. This goes back to one of those projects. It's unlikely that you're going to have a project from a class that you really enjoyed while you were doing it. At least not many of them. Maybe you will in some other class. But I tend to make my projects very structured and relevant. Maybe that's not so much true in game dev. I do some pretty fun things in game dev, but they're also a little bit less technical at times. Time when you needed to demonstrate leadership. Have that picked out, and again, the more relevant to the company, the better. A time when you were in conflict with another person in a technical setting. How did you resolve the conflict? Again, don't skimp on something that was a pretty bad conflict. I think that what they're looking for is the resolution process. How were you trying to work with the person? What was that process like? How did you handle it when they mistreated you? When they took advantage of you? Made you do all the work. For anything that's been up to this point, what would you do differently now? Shows, given what is different from the you who handled this and the you are today. Being able to showcase that growth, not just in the moment that it happened, but the growth that what you have learned about yourself since that moment or since that time. We hate the question, what are your weaknesses? But it is very much worth having a real weakness here. Do not give a fake weakness. I work too hard. No one wants to hear that. That's not a real weakness. If someone tells me that as a weakness, I don't trust them anymore. That tells me they're not going to be real with me or communicate their struggles with me in a way that I can help them or I can work with them. They're going to shove it all down, pretend like nothing is going on until it's reached a boiling point that we may not be able to recover from. I don't trust that person. So do describe real weaknesses, how you manage them, how you're working to improve them. What I would give in this setting, I talked to one person in here about this yesterday, but if I were answering this question, because I think leading by example is exactly the right kind of process for this. My common one is dealing with ADD. And it shows a real weakness because ADD is not only a weakness, it is also a strength, but it can have downsides that really affect your work performance. So talking about that you're aware of what that can look like. How are you managing it? How are you working to improve it? Well, I'm medicated. I understand what it is like to work with someone with ADD. My dad had ADD. I saw how my parents handled it. I know how to be aware of when this is affecting me. And the processes that I use for that is to utilize a task list or a checklist to make sure that I'm not forgetting things that I may be easily distracted from. To circle back on things, utilize notifications, utilize daily task lists and reminders.
And add on to that, real fast, ADD, ADHD are federal protected disabilities, so if you're not comfortable bringing
Yes.
in an interview, which is valid, you can pull one of the symptoms from it that the evidence. So what I do is I mention I'm very time blind, which
Sure.
so that means that I might be really invested in a project and not necessarily have context of the deadline, or I might, arrive late to work, I might accidentally stay late to work. That's something that, that's a little bit of a way to get at the same situation, but not disclose a protected disability.
Yes. So that is also something to be aware of for sure. If you do decide to disclose something, I like to be as open as I feel comfortable being. If I can talk about it, I like to be able to talk about it, because if an employer would use that against me for some reason, I want to know that sooner rather than later. I want to opt to not put myself in that situation where something that is not my fault that I'm doing my best to handle is used against me. That is a hostile workplace environment to me and somewhere that I do not want to work. So all of that is information you can take of that as what you will. We are done for the day. We'll come back and talk about this more tomorrow. We'll see what Monday looks like. I guess the two announcements I would give are, remember course evaluations. If you have not filled those out, that would be super meaningful to me. And then we have an assignment due tomorrow. I revealed the graphs assignment that's due next day, is when I decided to give me and the grader enough time to grade it. I think that's everything. I still feel like I'm forgetting something. If so, I'll post it to Canvas. Office hours starting now.